Africa's most populous nation, home to over 230 million people, suddenly transforms from a struggling economy into a continental powerhouse. Nigeria's economy is showing signs of a turnaround. Oil production is climbing again, reforms are kicking in, and the world's largest single-train refinery has finally come online. The numbers suggest Nigeria could be on the verge of an economic breakthrough that would reshape the entire continent forever. But here's where the story gets complicated. Behind these promising headlines lies a web of challenges so deeply entrenched that they could derail this entire transformation. So in this video, we'll look at why Nigeria appears to be getting rich and what could stop it from truly paying off. Let's start with the good news, because the numbers coming out of Nigeria are genuinely impressive. Nigeria's economy is showing renewed momentum, driven by a sharp recovery in oil production, up from 1.41 million barrels per day last year to 1.68 million today. At the center of this surge stands the Dangote refinery. This $19 billion engineering marvel, located in Lagos, represents more than just industrial infrastructure. With a processing capacity of 650,000 barrels per day, it's literally the largest single-train refinery in the world. The facility has already begun expanding, with plans to reach 700,000 barrels per day by December 2025. What makes this particularly significant is that Nigeria, despite being Africa's largest oil producer, has historically imported over 90% of its refined petroleum products. Think about that paradox for a moment. A country sitting on massive oil reserves, yet forced to export crude oil and import expensive refined fuel. The Dangote refinery has begun reversing this costly cycle. In its first year of operations, the refinery began exporting to Europe and West Africa, a historic shift for Nigeria. The International Monetary Fund projects Nigeria's GDP will expand by 3.4% in 2025, supported by the new domestic refinery, higher oil production, and robust services. This growth trajectory, while modest by some standards, represents a significant improvement for a country that has struggled with economic volatility for years. Beyond oil, Nigeria's non-oil sector is showing resilience. The services sector, driven by telecommunications and financial services, continues to expand. Agriculture, despite facing security challenges, contributed to the overall growth picture. Manufacturing is also benefiting from improved foreign exchange stability after years of currency uncertainty. The economic reforms initiated by President Bola Tinubu's administration are beginning to show results. The removal of fuel subsidies, while initially painful for consumers, has freed up significant government resources. The unification of exchange rates has eliminated the parallel market premium that previously created enormous inefficiencies in the economy. These changes have attracted international attention. Nigeria successfully tapped the Eurobond market with a $2.2 billion issuance, and credit rating agencies have begun to view the country more favorably. International reserves have increased to around $35 billion, providing crucial stability for the naira. If these trends continue, Nigeria could fundamentally alter its position in the global economy. The country's GDP is projected to reach $585 billion by the end of 2025. Up from an estimated $567 billion in 2024. But the real transformation potential lies in what economists call the multiplier effect. Consider what happens when a country transitions from being a fuel importer to a fuel exporter. Nigeria currently spends billions of dollars annually on fuel imports, money that flows out of the domestic economy. When the Dangote refinery reaches full capacity, this money stays within Nigeria, creating jobs, generating tax revenue, and stimulating related industries. The refinery created about 135,000 construction jobs and is projected to sustain tens of thousands of direct and indirect jobs once fully operational. Transportation companies, logistics providers, maintenance services, and countless other businesses benefit when major industrial facilities operate efficiently. Nigeria's strategic location also positions it to become West Africa's energy hub. The country already supplies electricity to Benin, Togo, and Niger. With increased refining capacity, Nigeria could become the primary source of refined petroleum products for much of West Africa, generating substantial export revenues. The timing couldn't be better from a global perspective. Energy security concerns worldwide have elevated the importance of reliable suppliers. Nigeria, with its vast reserves and improving infrastructure, could capture a large share of global energy markets. But here's where Nigeria's story faces a turning point: electricity. The country's power crisis is one of the most glaring examples of how weak infrastructure can stall even the strongest economic advances. Nigeria has an installed capacity of about 12,000 megawatts, but due to grid failures and inefficiencies, only around 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts reliably reach consumers for over 230 million people. To put this into perspective, South Africa, with a population of 60 million, generates over 45,000 megawatts. The consequences are staggering. More than 85 million Nigerians have no access to grid power. Those who do have access experience frequent outages. The situation has become so dire that 60% of manufacturing companies, including firms from the Dangote group itself, have abandoned the national grid entirely. Think about the irony. The same company building Africa's largest refinery has had to disconnect from Nigeria's power grid because it's too unreliable. This forces businesses to rely on expensive diesel generators, dramatically increasing operational costs and carbon emissions. The economic impact is devastating. Nigeria loses an estimated $26 billion annually due to electricity shortages, while citizens spend approximately $22 billion yearly on private generators. These figures don't account for the environmental and health costs of millions of fossil fuel generators running across the country. The power crisis stems from multiple factors. Nigeria's transmission system can theoretically handle 7,500 megawatts, but realistically can only evacuate about 5,300 megawatts. The grid experiences regular total collapses. 3 occurred in the fourth quarter of 2024 alone. The infrastructure is aging, poorly maintained, and vulnerable to vandalism. If infrastructure represents Nigeria's most visible challenge, corruption constitutes its most insidious one. According to Chatham House, corruption has become so endemic that it undermines virtually every aspect of governance and economic development. The scale of this problem is breathtaking. While Nigeria boasts the 4th largest economy in Africa by GDP, its GDP per capita ranks among the continent's lowest. This disparity reflects how corruption diverts resources away from productive investments and public services. Corruption permeates multiple levels of society. In the oil sector, theft and mismanagement have cost Nigeria billions in potential revenue. Infrastructure projects suffer from inflated contracts and substandard execution. Even the power sector, desperate for investment, struggles to attract sustainable financing due to concerns about transparency and governance. The human cost is immense. Nigeria's poverty rate remains above 40%, despite the country's enormous natural wealth. Food insecurity affects millions of people in a nation with vast agricultural potential. Perhaps most troublingly, survey data shows widespread distrust in Nigerian institutions. When citizens lose faith in their government's ability to deliver basic services, it creates a vicious cycle where informal economic activities proliferate, tax compliance decreases, and public resources shrink further. Nigeria faces security challenges that directly impact economic growth. Insecurity in rural areas has severely affected agricultural production, forcing the country to import food it could easily produce domestically. Oil production, while recovering, remains vulnerable to theft and sabotage. The IMF specifically notes that a deterioration of security could impact growth and food insecurity. This creates a dangerous feedback loop where economic hardship contributes to social instability, which in turn discourages investments and growth. In the northeast, ongoing conflicts have displaced millions of people and disrupted economic activities. Farmers cannot access their fields, markets operate irregularly, and infrastructure projects face constant threats. The economic cost of security challenges extends far beyond the immediate regions affected. Even if Nigeria managed to overcome its internal conflicts and protect its industries, another threat looms over its future. Even with rising oil output and the Dangote refinery boosting confidence, Nigeria's public finances remain under immense pressure. The paradox is clear. Oil windfalls aren't translating into fiscal stability. Much of the new revenue is already spoken for, either to cover subsidies, civil service salaries, or urgent security spending. In fact, analysts note that Nigeria's revenue to GDP ratio, under 10%, is among the lowest in the world. That means the government simply doesn't collect enough taxes to fund basic services, forcing it to rely heavily on borrowing. And that brings us to one of Nigeria's biggest vulnerabilities: debt. The country's growing debt has become so overwhelming that it risks swallowing the benefits of economic growth before ordinary Nigerians ever feel them. Nigeria's debt now exceeds $100 billion, and the 2025 budget allocates about 14.3 trillion naira for debt servicing, over 1/3 of the total spending. That places serious pressure on funds available for infrastructure, health, and education. The government plans to borrow 9.22 trillion naira to finance the 2025 budget, higher than the 7.83 trillion naira borrowed in the previous year. This debt spiral creates a vicious economic cycle. High government borrowing increases interest rates across the economy. making private sector borrowing expensive and limiting business investment in productive activities. Companies cannot access affordable funds needed for expansion, innovation, and job creation that would drive sustainable economic growth. The result is an economy where public debt crowds out private investment. Meanwhile, Nigeria's economic progress remains highly vulnerable to external shocks. Oil revenues still account for about half of government revenue and nearly 90% of export earnings, leaving Nigeria dangerously exposed to global oil price swings. The IMF warns that a further decline in oil prices or increase in financing costs would adversely affect growth, fiscal, and external positions. This dependency becomes particularly problematic during global economic uncertainty. Rising interest rates in major economies increase Nigeria's borrowing costs, while commodity price volatility can quickly destabilize government finances. Nigeria stands at a crossroads. The potential for economic transformation is real and substantial. The Dangote refinery represents just the beginning of what could be a broader industrial renaissance. Oil production is recovering, economic reforms are showing results, and international confidence is gradually improving. However, success requires addressing fundamental structural challenges. The electricity crisis must be solved through massive infrastructure investments and regulatory reforms. Corruption needs to be tackled through institutional strengthening and improved transparency. Security challenges require comprehensive strategies that address the root causes of instability. The government's current reform agenda, while painful in the short term, could create the foundation for sustained growth. Removing fuel subsidies, unifying exchange rates, and improving tax collection represents crucial steps toward fiscal sustainability. Whether Nigeria becomes truly wealthy depends on its ability to navigate these competing pressures. The next few years will determine if Nigeria grows into a leading economic force in Africa or remains held back by its own structural limitations. So will Nigeria's oil wealth and bold reforms finally deliver lasting prosperity, or will history repeat itself and hold the country back once again? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dives like this, hit like and subscribe.